SAS demonstration video combining SAS datasets. In the first part of this video, we are going to use the set statement to concatenate two datasets together. So we're going to start with a dataset called boys. This is a temporary SAS dataset and it has 5 variables in it. And then we are also creating a temporary SAS dataset called girls, which has 4 variables in it. And we are going to then create a combined dataset called all kids, which is going to append the two datasets together using the set statement. So basically all we need to do to concatenate or append these two datasets is to say set and then list the two datasets that we want to append together. So I'm listing boys and then girls. So the new dataset, all kids, is going to show all of the observations from the boys dataset followed by all of the observations from the girls dataset. So let's go ahead and run this code and do a proc print of the all kids dataset. I also want you to notice that I used 2 title statements here. So we can have more than just one title statement within a procedure. So notice here is our printout of the all kids dataset. All of the boys appear first because we use the set statement with boys going before girls. Notice that for the girls dataset, the variable height is missing for all of the girls. And that's because this variable height was only on the boys dataset. It was not input for the girls dataset. Now let's reverse the set statement and have girls go before boys. And so when we reverse it and print it out, we're going to see that all the girls show up first in the dataset, followed by all of the boys. And here's the reverse. All the girls appear first, the boys follow. And again, because there was no variable height on the girls dataset, SAS creates a variable height for all of the observations in the all kids dataset, but for girls that height is missing because it wasn't on the original dataset. Now let's say we want to merge two datasets together that have different variables. So we want to merge a dataset that we're calling exam. So we're creating a SAS dataset called exam, and we're inputting ID, exam date, gender, age, height, weight, systolic blood pressure, and diastolic blood pressure. And we're formatting exam date with the MMDDYY10 dot format. And so these are our data lines. And then we are also inputting a data set that's called lab. And so this is a SAS temporary data set, and we're just inputting 2 variables, ID and HGB for hemoglobin. So notice that on both data sets there's an ID, and that's going to be the variable that we're going to merge the 2 data sets on. So the first thing we're going to want to do is sort each of the data sets. We're going to sort our data set exam by ID and our data set lab by ID. And then we're just going to print out the variables in each of the 2 data sets. So this is a printout of the lab data set, and this is a printout of the exam data set. And I do want you to notice that not all of the ID numbers are on both of the data sets. So here in the exam data set we have ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on the lab data set we have IDs 1, 3, 4, 6, and 12. So we'll see some interesting things because of having different observations on the 2 data sets. So now we want to create this data set called exam_lab. And we're going to merge the 2 data sets together, and we're going to merge it by ID. So without doing anything else, let's just look at the printout of our new combined data set. And so here you see our combined data set. And notice that, for example, ID 12 doesn't have any of the information that came from the exam data set because ID 12 was not on that data set. So for all of those variables that were on the exam data set, they're set to missing for ID 12, which was only on the lab data set. Similarly, ID 2 was not on the lab data set, but was on the exam data set. So ID 2 has all of the variables for the exam data set, but no variable hemoglobin from the lab data set because that ID did not appear on the lab data set. So basically ID 12 only has lab values, whereas IDs 5 and 2 only have exam data. I mentioned earlier in the PowerPoint presentation that strange things happen if you don't include the by variable, if we don't include by ID. So I just thought it might be fun to run the code and comment out the by ID and see what happens, just so you'll see, because a lot of times you might forget that by statement. I know I have in the past and have always been struck by the output I received, and have always been struck by the output that comes when I run this code without the by statement. So you see things look kind of wacky without the by statement. Suddenly we have two ID 6s appear, we have ID 12, we're missing ID 2 and ID 5. So if you forget the by statement, it's not that your program won't run, but your output is going to look kind of kooky. And if it looks kooky, then you're going to want to check and make sure that you didn't do something wrong like leaving out the by statement. Now let's say that we are interested in including only cases that are in both data sets. And so we're going to make use of the in equals contributor variable. So using the in equals contributor variable creates a contributor variable with a value of 1, which means true, if the data set has contributed to the current observation being created, and 0 otherwise. The contributor variable is a temporary variable. It can be used anywhere in the data step, but is not added to the new data set. Variables in1 and in2 are not on the new data set. So if a particular observation was in both the exam data set and the lab data set, then we would expect that in1 would equal 1 and in2 would equal 1. And that would mean that that observation showed up in both data sets. So here is what we are doing. We are going to create a new data set, exam_lab2, and this is a temporary SAS data set, and we're merging exam and we're merging lab. And notice here we're adding in parentheses this in equals in1 and in equals in2. So we've added the parentheses following each of the SAS data sets that we're merging. Again, we're merging by ID, and we had already sorted these data sets, so they're okay to use the by variable now. And then we're writing the statement if in1 and in2. And that's the same as saying if in1 equals 1 and in2 equals 1. And so basically what we're saying is, did the observation show up in both the exam data set and the lab data set? And if it did, we want it on our new data set. So let's run this code and see what happens. So now we have a new data set, and so notice we now have complete data on all 4 of these IDs. The IDs 2, 5, and 12 were excluded from this data set, exam_lab2, because they were not on both the exam and the lab data sets. Now, how do we include cases that are in the exam data set regardless of whether they had lab data? So if we wanted to include all the cases that were in the exam data set, regardless of whether they had lab data, then our statement is just going to be if in1, which is the same as saying if in1 equals 1, or if that observation had contributed from the exam data set. So here's the output for exam_lab3. And here we see these are all the observations, IDs 1 through 6, which were on the exam data set, regardless of whether they appeared on the lab data set. So in this data set, IDs 2 and 5 are included, but are missing information from the lab data sets because they didn't appear on the lab data sets. Now let's go to the other situation. How do we include cases that are in the lab data set regardless of whether they appeared on the exam data set? And I want to show you that I did something a little different here. I changed the in1 and in2 to variable names examDat and labDat. You don't have to just use in1 and in2 as names of your contributor variable. They can be any name. So here I'm saying merge exam in equals examDat, lab in equals labDat. And I'm interested in those observations that appeared on the lab data set, whether or not they were on the exam data set. So here's the output from exam_lab4. So these are the 5 observations that were on the lab data set. And notice that one of them, ID 12, does not have any information from the exam data set because that ID was not on the exam data set. Now we're going to look at a different example where we want to merge data sets that have the same variable names besides the merging variable ID num. So let's look at what we're doing here. We're creating 2 data sets, one called old Sal, a temporary SAS data set, and another data set called new Sal. And so in our first data set, we're inputting name, ID num, gender, age, salary, job cat, and year. In our second data set, new Sal, we're also inputting name, ID num, salary, job cat, and year. So notice that there are a number of variables on both of these data sets that are exactly the same. Notice that on the old Sal data set, year is always 1989. On the new Sal data set, year is always 1995. So what's going to happen if we merge these 2 data sets together? So first of all, we're going to sort each of the data sets by ID num. So that's going to be the merging variable. And then we're going to merge the 2 together by ID num. Well, the problem is that for variables on both data sets, values of the second data set are going to be written over variables on the first data set. So let's take a look at this output and see what I'm talking about. So if we look here, notice we have 9 observations. We've combined the 2 data sets. We've merged the 2 data sets, but year has been overwritten on most of the observations. Notice that the last observation, Barb, still has the year 1989 because Barb did not appear on the second data set. And also salary, another variable that appeared on both data sets with the exact same name, the salary from the new Sal data set overwrote the salary from the old Sal data set. So how can we get around this problem? We can get around this problem by renaming variables so that the new data set, combine 1, has information on salary and job categories for both years. So we're going to make use of the rename statement that we talked about in the SAS management video. So our code again follows where we're combining the 2 data sets. So we're using the merge statement, and then we're using a by statement. And notice here that I'm using rename for old Sal, and I'm renaming the variable salary and renaming it salary 89. The variable job cat, I'm renaming job cat 89. Within the new Sal data set, I'm renaming salary 95, and job cat, I'm renaming job cat 95. I'm going to merge the data sets by ID num, and I'm going to drop the variable year. And the reason I'm dropping the variable year is I don't need it anymore. That information is in the new variable named salary 89 and salary 95, job cat 89 and job cat 95. So let's run this code and see what our new combine 1 data set looks like. So here we have more variables than we did when we merged the data sets without renaming these variables. We actually now have 2 variables for salary. We have salary 89 and salary 95. We have job cat 89 and job cat 95. If you notice above here, we just had a variable salary and a variable job cat, but these had overwritten the old Sal data set. In this new output, we have separate variables, salary 89 and salary 95, so we're not losing any information. This was the original data for the subjects in the old Sal data set, and this is the original salary code for the observations in the new SAL data set. And we've also kept the job categories for both 89 and 95. And finally, I'm going to show how we can use our in variables to keep only cases that are in both data sets. So not only am I renaming the variables in this merge statement, so this is one very long statement, this merge statement, but I'm also using contributor variables, and I'm now calling the contributor variables old and new. And so here's my long merge statement, then I have my by statement, and then I have my statement if old and new. And so we're telling SAS that we only want to keep observations that appeared in both the old SAL data set and the new SAL data set. And then I'm creating a variable called total SAL where I'm adding the salary in 89 and the salary in 95. And lastly, I'm formatting all of these salary variables with the $12 format. So let's run all of this code and see what our final combined two data set looks like. And so we see here that there were 4 observations that appeared in both the old SAL data set and the new SAL data set. So for observation 1, Martha, we see her salary for 89, we see her salary for 1995, and we see her total salary, which is the sum of her salary in 1995 and her salary in 1989. This concludes the video combining SAS datasets.